to the BPD Bunch. I'm your host, Xannie, and today I'm here with Georgette, Carys, Jess, and Solene. Where in the world is everyone coming from today?
Toronto, New Jersey,
London,
Ontario.
So today we are going to talk about BPD and working. Living with mental and emotional health challenges makes working really difficult. And if you live with BPD, you may struggle feeling confident at work, staying in the same job, or being able to manage work and BPD at all. We're going to talk about some of our experiences with BPD and various forms of employment and the ways that we have learned to manage it, and maybe some of the things that we're still dealing with today. Because, as we all know, recovery is not linear. So, to start us off, why don't we just go around and everybody share with our audience what it is that you are currently doing for work. I am a seamstress on the side. That used to be my primary job before I started this show, but now this show pretty much eats up all my time, and I love it. I'm totally here for it. So, anyway, who wants to go next?
I work in residential construction. I'm part of a labor union, and I'm a finisher. When a brand new house, when it gets built and has everything already installed, then somebody like me, a handyman, goes through and just fixes everything that needs fixing before the homeowner moves in.
I'm a social justice lawyer. So I, in the past, I've done a lot of free legal services for people in the community. And right now I'm working at a university, and we're building a legal clinic so that we can work with the community and provide free legal services and provide law students a place to get some practice as well.
Amazing. I'm happy to go next. Currently, I'm a program manager for Disabled Innovators. So I work for the Government Agency for Innovation in the UK, and I help people with various types of disabilities to get access to funding and support so they can create their businesses, grow their businesses, etc. So this is after a lot of twists and turns, so more on that later. What about you, Georgette?
So I currently work as a nurse educator in a hospital. So I help onboard nurses into their various roles. I provide continuing education to them based on their roles and kind of guide orientees through the process of orientation.
I love that we all do such different things.
If you think back to when your BPD was the most symptomatic, what are some of the biggest challenges that you all found with working and having BPD?
I have two from two different careers. The first one is when I was teaching, as anyone with teachers in their family knows, the majority of the work a teacher does is not in the classroom, it's at home. And I had a really hard time with boundaries. So I felt like if I didn't deliver a perfect lesson, then all the children in my classroom would end up living on the streets. If I didn't get it presented so that I reached every child, then I would be an abysmal failure, and so would the lives of all of these children. So it was really, really difficult because I put so much pressure on myself. I ended up losing my whole life to teaching, essentially. I didn't have any friends. And so the next year I tried enforcing my boundaries. And it's really kind of funny because I could tell from the parents, from their interactions with me, that I got much more appreciation from them in the year that I didn't have boundaries. I knew they could tell that I wasn't putting as much of myself in. So that's when I decided that I was done teaching. I had a hard time balancing. So, Then when I started in construction, it was very invalidating environment because of the company that I was with. So also I'm co-diagnosed with OCPD. So when somebody says, why would you do something like that? I'm compelled to answer. So why did you do that? Well, because of this. But my communication style didn't really work well with everybody. And
Xannie, you said the most symptomatic periods of our life and what working was like. And that just took me back. 2018 was I was working at a legal aid clinic, and this was a 2-year period where like suicidality was huge for me and self-harm was huge for me at this time. And that's, I sort of realized how bad my mental health was when I, had a suicide attempt, was in the ER, and then showed up at work the next morning, maybe like an hour late, as if nothing had happened, and I was just like, this is not working. This is not healthy. This is not good for me. I used work a lot to try to distract myself, but then I was also going into my job, not fully available, not okay, not reaching out for any kind of support. And my psychiatrist at the time was just like, you have to take a leave from work. Like, I strongly urge you to take a leave from work. So I did for 4 months. I went on disability for 4 months. And that was probably one of the best things I could have done for my mental health at the time, because I was able to focus all of my attention on like recovering. Xannie, what's your question?
So one of the things that we sort of the BPD community at large knows is this like idealizing and devaluing. And usually that comes out in reference to relationships. That's almost always what we're talking about, is like with people. But I know one of the things that you've experienced that we've talked about is this idealizing and devaluing jobs. And I just was wondering if you would touch on that and sort of what that experience has been like for you.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've spoken to you about that with my job, and I think I've also experienced that with the BPD bunch. It's almost like any kind of activity or task that I take on can really set me off one way or another. So it's something I have to be hyper aware of. And like I said earlier, I always fall into jobs where I feel like, they're meaningful. I'm contributing in some kind of way. So I'll get these ideas of just like, wow, like this is the most meaningful job. I'm going to do such great work. This is so well suited to my skills. It's meant to be. I'm finally going to be happy. This is going to make my life. I'm going to I'm not going to have that emptiness and that dread anymore. This is a perfect fit. So that's kind of the idealization part, right? And of course, every role has pros and cons. Every role in life, you're going to have good days, you're going to have bad days. Something as simple as just feeling overwhelmed with workload, or something as simple as having one interaction with a coworker that maybe was a little bit invalidating, not even disrespectful, not even like anything out of the norm, but maybe just a little invalidating. And I take that home with me. And all of a sudden I switch and I'm like, okay, I'm not meant to be in this job anymore. Like, it was an okay job. The people are okay. It's whatever. What's next? I'm going to jump ship by the end of the year. Like, I'll start thinking like that. And then at the more extreme end of that thinking, it's like, wake up in the morning. Oh my God, I have to go to work. I have to go into this job. It's not even that bad of a job. I actually like the job, but it's the having to get myself there. And then I'll start having all these passive suicidal thoughts just between like my front door to the front door of my office, and it's a really overwhelming feeling. It is very difficult for me to regulate even today. But yeah, that's sort of what the idealization and then the devaluation looks like to me. Yeah.
It's funny because I have a lot of similar experiences as Jess. I don't have the passive suicidal thoughts, but I do have the I'm going to quit now. And like, I'm just going to get in my truck and drive away. That's it. I'm done. Just over something that's like so small, like essentially nothing, the tiniest little thing.
Jess, something you said, I was like, oh my gosh, because I was hospitalized for attempting suicide. And I was so worried about not getting to work. I was in this psychiatric ER freaking out because I was like, but I have to go to work. I'm supposed to be at work tomorrow at 9 a.m. I can't be here. Work was kind of what kept me alive when I was having these suicidal like thoughts and attempts, because something in me was like, well, I'm supposed to teach a class tomorrow. And like, if I don't show up, nobody's going to teach that class. And I found work as a refuge that I was going to as like a distraction from all the craziness going on in the rest of my personal life, and work kind of was something that I could go to.
Georgette, I really liked how you brought that perspective that work BPD, they interact sometimes in, let's say, negative way, sometimes in a positive way, and work can be a place where you feel safe, but it can also be a place that, Jess and Carys, you've touched on, that brings that kind of toxic and challenges and negativity and all sorts of things. So it's a really interesting relationship, I think, and I've navigated that for sure. The worst, I would say, probably is, for me, linked to what Carys, you were saying about the perfectionism. So I wanted to mask. I didn't know I had BPD, no idea. But I knew that I was different. I would overcompensate and mask and try to be the kind of perfect professional, perfect manager, perfect this and that and the other. And I was working in China and I was living out there on my own, and we were building a company. So, there was so much to do. And so I would just overwork. I would work 7 days a week, 80, 90 hours, just throw my entire being into work. And I was okay with that because I thought, but I love my job and I love what we're building here. But then I broke my hand on the job. So I had like a work accident kind of thing, 10:30 in the evening. Yeah, anyway, really a big nightmare. And that, I think, kind of brought me back to reality. I was like, it shows up as well in relationships. Few people have already touched on interpersonal relationships. For me, with team members and colleagues, it actually is really beneficial, like the high empathy and the wanting to help people and get to know people and etc. That's a bit from me. But Xannie, what about you?
I really struggled to maintain a job, period. Because I think primarily because I was just so mood dependent. Anything I did was completely dependent on how I was feeling. So if I was feeling good and like I could do things, I'd be like, all right, I'm gonna go get a job. And I remember when I was living in New York City, I got a job in like a Japanese food restaurant and I quit after a week because towards the end of the week I just wasn't feeling very great and I was like, I can't do this anymore, bye. And that was kind of a lot of my experience. I rarely got fired because I would just quit before that would happen. I would just call in and be like, you know what, I'm never coming in again, bye. Or I would quit via just not showing up. The longest job I had while I was symptomatic was working at a movie theater. And that was really difficult because I really wanted to blow up at people. Yeah, I found later that the jobs that worked the best for me were ones where I was an independent contractor. It's not exactly like being your own boss like I am now. Like now I run a business, but it was definitely things where it was like I could set my schedule, or like if I needed to tell a client like I need to move this to another day, I could do that. I definitely leaned too heavy on that at first. It was kind of an excuse not to work sometimes. But in the long run, I think being able to know that I could like call in and just be like, I'm going to do this thing, but tomorrow, or I'm going to move these things around so that I can manage such and such issue. That was really, really helpful, I think.
That having a role in which you have a little bit of freedom over your schedule can be really helpful because you can kind of give yourself accommodations. When you have a bad mental health day or you need some time to kind of gather yourself or take some time for yourself to get yourself back into that, to manage your symptoms in a way so that you can keep moving forward.
I found when I was working, doing more direct services with clients, I had to be accountable to my clients, right? And if I didn't do the work, really impactful things were going to happen to other people who were relying on me to provide the service or fill this role. And now that I'm doing more like, programming, creating, teaching, I don't have that immediate client need. So that accountability piece is really missing. And I find it very, very difficult to be accountable to myself. There are a few things that are helping. I find just like setting a routine every day is helping. I have an incredibly supportive manager right now. Him and I are like an awesome team. I've disclosed to him and he gives me the space. So having that flexibility is really, really helpful. I like that you said being able to like accommodate yourself, right? And I'm trying to think of all the ways that I have accommodated myself. And a lot of it is taking those mental health days, taking my vacation days. I make sure that I'm using all of that stuff and that I'm communicating with the people around me. And having like ownership over your role, really feeling like you're having a lot more autonomy in your role is really, really helpful as well. I'm working in an environment that supports work-life balance. I'm setting my own boundaries. I'll say no to certain things. If it's something that we have to get done and it's being put on me to do, I might even try to like collaborate on it or find other ways to make it more exciting. Trying to identify like the meaning in tasks and why is this important and who is this impacting, and looking at the bigger picture. That helps me kind of get motivated again. Going back and reading my cover letter when I applied to the job, right? Why was I even interested in this job in the first place? That's another thing that I do to help motivate myself. But it's really, really hard. I had an instance just this week where I had to reschedule like a clinic group that I was running because I was just emotionally not able to go forward with my day. I was sitting on my couch sobbing all day. I couldn't run this group. So I had to reschedule it. I kind of reflected on that and I realized, okay, I had been sick. I wasn't eating well. I wasn't sleeping well. I was going to bed at like 4 a.m. every night, and I just wasn't getting my basic needs met as well. And that makes it a lot harder to then be able to maneuver through things like lack of motivation. So even just getting my basic needs met, making sure that I'm at least eating and sleeping on somewhat of a routine is really helpful for me too.
So one of the things that we sort of touched on a little bit is accommodations. And, there's two ways that you can kind of be accommodated in your job, right? One of them is finding the type of work in which you can accommodate yourself, or, expressly asking for accommodations from your job. Because some of the things, Jess, that you talked about, like saying, no, I'll do this next week, would not be acceptable in some jobs. Like some jobs, you're not allowed to do that. And so that's one of the things I want to make clear is some of these things you have to kind of set that up intentionally, because we all come from different countries. We can't like on this call say, this is what you should do, because the laws for accommodations are going to be different. But at least for all of the countries that we come from, and some of the ones where we can find reliable information, check links down below on some of the we'll put the Americans with Disabilities Act information down there and some of the other things. So that way, where if you're watching this and this is something that you want to look into, you'll be able to find some of the relevant information to hopefully help you to get some of the accommodations that are available for you in your workplace. What are some of the ways in which you have either expressly asked for accommodations in your job, or what are the things that you look for or looked for when going for the job you have now that were setting you up for being able to accommodate yourself?
For me, it's big because the structure that I have right now, I take essentially like not a literal ownership, but I take ownership over a home that somebody else is going to move into. So I'm like the first person in this family's home, and I'm there by myself. So I basically have a checklist of all the things that have to get done before the closing date. And I can move through that and progress through that list in any order that I please. So if I'm having a really down day, then what I might be doing is scraping paint off the floor and the countertops. It's kind of mindless. I could just put on a nice relaxing playlist and do a mindfulness activity, because the job that I'm doing itself doesn't require mindfulness. Like when I'm having a really hard day with I need to do something with lots of energy. If there's a day that I need to move a wall or like fix baseboard, or, I get to use my tools and go in and out of the house and do lots of stuff. I'm doing lots of stairs. That's a high energy day. Also, I did disclose to my employer, and now they know that like there are just some days if I mention it, then they just don't put me in a house with anybody else, or they'll tell me like, hey, they're installing hardwood in this house, so if you had planned to work in that one, you might want to move to a different spot. So if I don't find out about that right away, then sometimes that'll spin me and it'll take a while for me to regulate again. Sorry, but don't mess with my schedule. They've been really good at making accommodations for that. Because I did choose to disclose.
I've never expressly asked for accommodations. And I kind of found myself in a job where I was able to accommodate myself. But picking up on what Carys said about disclosing to my manager, I have a great manager. She's been super supportive, and because I've disclosed to her my troubles and my problems, I guess that's my indirect way of asking for accommodations, is like disclosing that to her. So if I reach out and say I can't come in today, there's a lot more understanding. So it's like an indirect way of asking for accommodation.
I think a big thing for me is that I'm a member of a union. So I know I'm protected because of my union membership. That was really important to me when I started to think about that I did have borderline. It was before I was officially diagnosed, and I was in the process of applying for my union membership when I actually was diagnosed. But I really needed to make sure I had a position that would protect me. And it wasn't just going to be like someone could say, oh, blah, 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 whatever reason you're out. And that's very important to me as well, to know that I have that structure and that framework, that I'm going to have a pension no matter what happens to me in my life. As long as I put in these years, I show up, I go home, and I do things while I'm there, that I'm not going to be like destitute. I am going to be protected regardless of my mental health issues.
For me, it's been about finding a job that I can do in like less days. So right now I'm working 5 days into 4. It's called compressed hours. So it does mean that I do really long days, but that suits me because I can stay focused for a long time on the thing. But then I have my one day during the week, and usually it kind of eats into the weekend, but where I do things like Xannie. So I have my own businesses and I'm an entrepreneur and I do a whole bunch of stuff. And I've tried to be only an entrepreneur, but then I got so scared because it's all, it's got its whole different set of challenges, around you're responsible for your schedule, for your money, for a whole bunch of stuff. So there's a whole bunch of fear there. But then I've got the kind of structure and the employment in my job. So that's how I was about to say balancing, but I really don't like that word because I don't know anything about it. I feel like, but that's how I'm trying to manage to and back to Jess' point about motivation, right? To balance and manage my motivation levels. So it's by having some stability, responsibility, ownership, a job that gives back, that helps others, and also having my personal projects that I love, doing writing, presenting, all the things that motivate me. By having both, it's what keeps me intrinsically and extrinsically motivated, right? It gives me that balance of the two. Radical acceptance, one of the toughest DBT skills ever. That has really helped with this piece, because before I used to think, this next job, it has to be it. It has to be the thing that I'm going to do for the rest of my life, and be a good, normal, massive inverted commas person, right? But the radical acceptance of no, actually it doesn't have to be that way. It can be, it's my life, it's my career. It's okay if it looks different because I am different. So maybe it makes total sense actually that it is different. So that radical acceptance piece, anyone can do. You don't need to ask. You can kind of do on your own and reflect and kind of then from there look for something that suits you from that radical acceptance of your preferences and who you are as a person. So yeah, I just wanted to put that out there.
I mean, I've requested accommodations a little bit, not too drastic accommodations, but I've also been involved in other people requesting accommodations quite often. And a lot of people don't realize that they can request specific accommodations at work. And then a lot of people also don't know what kind of accommodations are available or what they can request. And when you ask for accommodations, you don't have to disclose your diagnosis, right? But you do need to disclose what it is that you need to be able to do the job effectively, right? So I think it's a good idea to brainstorm with people who know you well, brainstorm with your doctor, with your therapist, to come up with some ways that you can ask for accommodations. For people with mental health issues, it's often being able to step away and take space when you need it. making sure that you have privacy, talking effectively about your boundaries. That's not something where you're like specifically requesting accommodations, but maybe it is, right? Maybe there's something within your boundaries that will require some accommodations, but making sure that you're able to have that open communication with somebody at your workplace, somebody in your HR office, or whatever it might be. Asking for more time is a huge one, right? If you're somebody who is just going to need more time to get assignments done, to get work done, that's okay. You can ask for that. Asking for, in my experience, when I asked for a sick leave, I was in a position that it wasn't a contract position, it was a permanent position. I had benefits, and I just needed a note from my doctor just saying that Jessica needs to go on leave for at least this amount of time, and then we'll reevaluate at that point. And that's all it said. It didn't say why. It didn't say my diagnosis. It didn't say what my symptoms were. It was like 2 sentences. And that's all my employer needed. And then my supervisor was like, all right, feel free to share with me if you'd like, but no questions asked. I understand, we'll, give me a date for when you need to get out of here, and we'll transfer all your files to other people and you can pick them back up when you're back. Like, I've been really lucky that I've worked in places where people understand the law, like all lawyers. And I've worked in places where people are also working with people with mental health issues quite often. Like all of my clients have varying levels of mental health related disabilities. A lot of people have a lot of stigma, a lot of shame, just a lot of assumptions, a lot of stereotypes are gonna think that maybe you're incapable of doing the work because you need time or because you need accommodations. So it is a really hard thing to do. And I think just seeking support around that from as many people as you can, your support network, your therapist, at work if you can.
So to me, I think the biggest thing I found that helps me now is not being afraid to ask for help. So I know, Jess, you were talking about asking for extensions. So in my line of work, if we move the closing date of a house, it costs the company millions of dollars. So an extension isn't going to happen. Like when a date is set, it's set. But what I've started to get I've started to ask for help. I used to be really ashamed to do it. But then not doing it would just put me in a really tricky situation where all of a sudden I'm overwhelmed and then it's a problem. So I've started to just say, hey, I can do this, this, and this, and this. But I can't do all of the things before the time. So I can do 3 things. And then I ask my employer to choose which 3 things they are. So I've got really good communication with my supervisors, thankfully, so that they understand what my limitations are. That way I don't get behind and I don't have to ask for extensions. They just supply the help. They're like, okay, we'll have this guy come over and do X. Will that help? And I'll be like, yeah, thank you. Like, it's perfect. I used to be so ashamed for asking help, but now there's much more understanding, especially because I did disclose. And I do tend to over-explain anyway, so they understand their reasons. And then I give them the choice of what I do.
Some people, and some of us have been in these positions at some point in time, live paycheck to paycheck. And you can't just quit your job and then go immediately find something that has accommodations, right? Like, you may be in a place that isn't giving you what you need, and or maybe you just don't like your job, right? And I think one of the things that I really worked on was not just up and leaving for multiple reasons. One is all of a sudden you don't have an income, but another is that it's a great way to burn bridges. And if you're trying to get another job, having good recommendations can be important. So in 2017, I was really not doing very well, and I was running an office for a company, and I wanted to just shut my doors and leave and never come back. But I radically accepted. It's funny because I hadn't even learned radical acceptance yet, but it was sort of at this point I was like, okay, well, I don't want to just peace out. I've built relationships here that I do value. I want these people to be able to give me a good recommendation in the future. So, and I called up my manager and said, I don't think I can do this anymore. Like, I need to close the office and move on. And we went through the process of closing it the right way, so that I could do other things. And so sometimes you're in a position where you can't just up and leave. And, things you can do are, radically accept the position you're in. And when you have time, apply for other things, do research on how to get accommodations to figure out how you can get yourself supported. In terms of the things that I manage, obviously, like being really low functioning, it's not like you're managing work. So I think the way that I got to be functional was learning emotion regulation skills and being able to accept situations that were not perfect, and recognizing that I don't have to do things dependent on how I feel. And that was a long journey. It probably took me 10 years to really internalize that and understand it. I mean, people told me for years and years, you can do something even if you don't feel like it. And I was like, people don't do that. Are you crazy? Like, that's not a thing. But then once I got to a point where I was working, one of the things that I have struggled with is perfectionism, and especially in the things where it's more self-driven, where I'm really, like in my sewing work or in the show, I can get kind of perfectionistic. And my best friend once told me something. This was when I was in school. But she said to me, a 95 and 100 are still an A. If you have to spend an extra day studying to get those 5 extra points, is it really worth it? And that advice changed my life, because I would spend, like when I was sewing and working on wedding dresses, for example, if a line of stitches wasn't perfectly straight, I would redo it a bunch of times. And then I thought of what she said, and I was like, is anybody going to notice that this one thing's like 5 degrees off? No, I am the only one who's going to see it, and only because it's up close. If I stand a foot back, I don't even see it anymore. Right? So realizing that things can be good enough, they don't need to be perfect, and sitting with the discomfort is hard. But I think one of the things that's been really validating is that like 99% of the things that I thought were huge mistakes, not one person has noticed.
Yeah. Apply the 80-20. If 80% you like it, 20% you hate it, it's probably good.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that Jess mentioned is really important, that you don't need to disclose your diagnosis. And I think, there's a part of me that wants to say, well, but it's a part of me. I should be able to just say whatever I want to people. At the same time, we have to be aware of the fact that stigma exists. People have ideas about what BPD is. And it's not it probably is smart in a workplace to be cautious and not jump to this is the issue. I'm very fortunate that it has worked out in my favor a lot of the times, but depending on where you live and the laws, it does change. Somebody may not be able to legally fire you for telling them that you have BPD, but they can make a big deal out of some other mistake you make and fire you for that. And it's actually because of the disclosure, right? So it is important to be cautious and to be mindful of that, just because, we live in the world we live in. Again, it comes back to radical acceptance, right? We may not always like the situations that we're in, but we do need to be aware of the fact that people aren't always going to respond to us in the way that we want them to.
Can I just say, on this call, I think most people have said they have talked to their manager about their diagnosis. I haven't. So maybe it's worth just saying that indeed you don't have to disclose until you feel safe. Brené Brown, big fan. She talks about, people earning the trust to then, allow them to see the whole you kind of thing. So I have said that I have a long-term mental health condition, but I haven't disclosed what it is or how it shows up for me or anything like that. So there are also different steps that you can take if you start to feel a bit safer, things like that. So yeah, just to say that I haven't felt the psychological safety and the confidence that it's not going to be held against me around things like progression and things like that.
Yeah, I just wanted to make like one point of, we're all people here who have been managing to hold on to employment, different kinds of employment. but like it is not linear, right? I have been employed, I've been unemployed, I've been able to really mask at work and really get it going, and I've been really unable to mask at all and have been really incapable of working at all. So it's like, you know, it is really up and down throughout life, and I just wanted to mention that because I think like not working is also just as big of a topic as working. And I don't want people to feel like, you know, we all here have it together because we're working, right? It's very much up and down. It's not linear progression. And, you know, I've been in stages of both, right? Being able to work and not, and then in weird places in between.
Thank you so much, everyone, for watching. I think this is a really great conversation, and hopefully you got some ideas on how you can improve your own work situation, whether that's through getting accommodations, you know, accommodating yourself, or finding out what it is that you have control over in this moment. Make sure that you like, subscribe, and turn on your notifications so that you do not miss a single episode. We will be back next week talking about a kind of relationship that is often not discussed in BPD, that is BPD and friendships, so platonic, non-romantic relationships. How do we manage those? So come back next time to see that, and we'll see you then.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.